Olá pessoal, tudo bem? Aqui é Samuel Possebon, eu sou editor da Tela Viva e hoje a gente está começando um projeto novo, um projeto ainda experimental, mas que a gente tem certeza que vai se consolidar rapidamente, que é um projeto de trazer programas de entrevistas ao vivo aqui no site da Tela Viva. Isso também vai ser distribuído em outros canais. Esse projeto está sendo desenvolvido em parceria com o Fábio Sesnick. O Fábio é um parceiro de longa data, sócio do escritório CQS FV Advogados, um dos maiores especialistas no mercado audiovisual, não só brasileiro, mas no mercado internacional. O Fábio trouxe essa ideia para a gente comprou essa ideia e resolvemos desenvolver em conjunto. Então, já convido desde já o Fábio para estar comigo aqui nessa mesa. Fábio, obrigado pela parceria, obrigado pela ideia, e vai ser um grande desafio a gente trabalhar como apresentadores e mediadores num programa que tem como propósito trazer pessoas interessantes para conversar sobre audiovisual. Essas pessoas podem estar no Brasil, podem estar nos Estados Unidos, onde você tem as suas conexões. A ideia é trazer gente que tenha o que agregar em termos de conteúdo e que seja uma conversa interessante. Então, esse nosso Café com Pixel começa agora. Obrigado mais uma vez pela parceria. Passo a palavra para você.
Oh, super legal, Samuel. Obrigado pelo convite. Muito bacana começar esse projeto. E bacana começar esse projeto com o Juan Fernando Devis. O Juan, ele tem uma história interessante. Ele é colombiano, mudou para os Estados Unidos há muitos anos atrás, onde, enfim, dentre as várias funções, talvez a mais proeminente tenha sido ele ser o chefe de conteúdo da PBS, que é o canal público americano, né? A PBS seria o equivalente à TV Cultura ou a TVE no Brasil. Fez, na verdade, inúmeros programas como criador, ganhando Emmys e ganhando vários prêmios nos Estados Unidos. E aí ele saiu, está montando um estúdio, uma empresa, uma produtora dele, e fazendo conexões. Quer dizer, um dos principais caras junto com ele é o fundador da ICM, que foi uma das maiores agências de talento nos Estados Unidos. Ela foi recém-adquirida pela CAA. Então, vamos chamar para aqui o Juan para começar essa
Vou colocar ele aqui conosco. Juan, thank you very much for being our first guest. So it's an honor to have you with us. We are going to start the show with you, and hopefully you can also teach us a little bit about how to make television, because this is my first time organizing a show. First time Fabio is organizing a show, and you were very experienced. So we are counting with your experience to help us with this new program. But it's an honor to have you here.
Thank you. Muito obrigado, Samuel and Fabio. Muchas gracias for having me here on your new experimental show. And I was just going to say back during the pandemic, when we had to pivot to do things in a completely different way, there were so many shows that we launched that basically used this setup in order to be able to get news and culture to audiences. So I'm very familiar and how these experimental beginnings can turn into some great opportunities and possibilities. Thank you for having me here, Samuel and Fabio. It's an honor, and looking forward to the conversation.
Okay, great. So as Fabio was explaining to our audience, your previous job was being responsible for the content of PBS, the most important public television in US, especially for the California region. And I think that the public television is something really important here in Brazil, has a very important role in terms of audiovisual industry, independent audiovisual industry especially. And I would like to start this conversation just to having you talking a little bit about this background, because I think that this is important to understand what you're doing now. So can you explain a little bit about what did you do at PBS and what was your role there?
Yeah, I think it's important to make a distinction because I don't think in Brazil probably TV Cultura or public television works in the same way. Here here in the United States, PBS is a national network, right? That it's publicly funded by the government. There are funds that are allocated through the Corporation of Public Broadcasting that go to fund some of the content, and then the additional funds come from philanthropy, individual giving, some type of a sponsorship. And the network has affiliates across the United States, right? And some of them are bigger than others, depending on the markets, and some of them become producers of national content rather than producers only of the local content that is being served. In the case of me, I used to oversee. I was the chief content officer of the Los Angeles area PBS station, and the LA area is the second largest market in the United States. And one of the most interesting things about that particular market is that we have a very diverse population. If you see the breakdown, the demographic breakdown of Los Angeles, of Southern California, and California in general, you have plus 50% of the population here is Latino or Latino descent. 12 to 14% is Asian descent. Maybe 6% is African American. And the remaining are Anglo-Saxons to a certain degree. So, the proposition that the demographics here in California present you as a content creator are almost the propositions that programmers and producers need to be making almost 10 years from now when they look at the demographic changes of the United States, right? So when I took over that role, I was very keen in trying to understand what are the demographic changes of the area, but also what are the distribution and production sort of shifts that were happening. This is probably around 15 years ago, right, when there was the rise of social media, the rise of digital formats, the beginning of streaming services, and we had to very much adapt to those changes as we were also adapting to the type of content that we were creating, right?
And how was this adaptation for the new environment that we are facing with the digital formats and the digital platforms? Is that different for public television and for commercial television? Do you have any different requirements or any different perspectives when you're adapting the shows and the formats to this new reality?
Well, I think that one of the things a couple of things that you have to be aware of. One of them is the financial proposition, right? The, Being a non-commercial, publicly funded network, you cannot receive any funds from commercial ventures, right? Only there are very specific rules as to how you can be sponsored by, let's say a Coca-Cola or any other brand. So there are parameters in funding. And I think at the beginning, the tools, which I think is the effect that has had 15 years afterwards, the tools that were being incorporated for digital distribution, for example, were tools that were generated commercially as well, right? I think that that's a conversation that we constantly were having back then. We're using on the web back then and on the social media spaces, we were using proprietary commercial social networks in order to be able to sort of generate and distribute some of the content that we were doing. But at the same time, we were also experimenting on our own digital formats, on our own digital distributions, and digital storytelling. Early on, we did a lot of experiments on interactive storytelling on the web. We were doing a lot of experiments on formats like length and renewable, content. But unfortunately, I think that what has happened in these 15 years is the growth of social media and the growth of streaming networks, and the amount of money that they have been able to attract from investors has really clouded and created very complicated conditions for public media, right? Because if you look at CNN, for example, they launched their streaming service, I think, last year, and it was less
Last
than a
one
month.
week.
Yeah, it was 1 week. And if you look at that in the context of public television that doesn't have the financial backing to be reinventing itself in the digital world, with the resources that other companies have, it really lags behind, right? And I think that there needs to be a conversation, just like it happened back in when the PBS was created, a conversation about access and equity, when it comes to the type of content that is being generated by PBS, and who has access to it, and is it free, right? And I think that those questions need to be front and center right now within this massive digital transformation and distribution that is happening in relationship to public television. And I would say, for in Brazil, that needs to be a real priority, right? Is how do you create a streaming service that is competitive in the market, that is of the public service,
Yeah,
right?
that's a big challenge here. We don't have as you mentioned, our public television structure here is very different from the public television structure that you have in US or UK. Funding is definitely one of the key issues that we have here. Fabio, I will hand you to you so you can have the next question.
No, sure. No, this is super interesting, and I have a question for you, Juan. How do you think that will be the future of the public TV when you have variety of content in all these streaming services? So, do you have a guess about the future of public TV? So,
Well, if you look, for example, at Discovery's chairman yesterday or the day before, he was really sending to other studios and streamers the question of, we need to figure something out, because the amount of service that are out there, and the amount of sort of choices that consumers are having, are really diluting the marketing ways that we just don't understand. And I think, in a way, what is happening right now is what started to happen with cable. So I think that there needs to be a conversation about this convergence of streaming services, and there needs to be a real conversation about what is the presence and the role of a public service oriented service within that ecosystem, right? When cable network, ballooned, nonprofit public service media said, well, look, if we're going to have this consolidation, and if we're going to have all this happening, what are the benefits, and what is the public service that this is going to give to the rest of the population? And I think that point needs to be put right in front of in the future, so that we can ensure that public service media has a role and a presence in this massive growth that we're currently seeing.
When you had this job as a chief content officer for PBS, you had in mind that the public content that you were producing was not something that would compete directly with the commercial content, right? Probably you have different perspectives, and you have different goals with the content. I don't know if it was more educational. I don't know if it was more experimental or more artistic. I don't know exactly what was your approach. But do you believe that in this digital environment that we are living now, public content or audiovisual devoted to public platforms or to public TV would compete with the commercial, or we should still exploring experimentations or educational contents or more artistic perspective? what's the niche and where the public content should fit in this very competitive environment that we have for the audiovisual industry today?
Yeah, no, that is the key question, right? Is the, and I think that there are different ways of approaching. And Samuel, I just want to make clear that I was not the chief content officer of PBS. I was the chief content officer of PBS in Los Angeles.
Yeah, sure.
It's a distinction, um, because I was able to focus on different things that the chief content officer at PBS.
Don't
So
worry.
I think it's a very tricky situation, the one that public television is facing when it comes to the value that the content has, right, and the absorption that that content is going to have when we have such a cluttered media market, right? Um, and I think that there are two things. One of them, there is definitely a role and a purpose for public television to continue to have a perspective that is educational, a perspective that is, unearthing stories, unearthing issues that are extremely important for the benefit and the health of society, right? Nobody else has that as their goal, right? There's no Netflix and no production company, no that whose goal is um, to have content that is ultimately for the benefit of society as a whole, right? I almost see it a little bit as um the sustainable food movement. Hold on, let me I almost see it as a sustainable food movement, that you have things that need to be locally grown, you need to clean the soil, you need to locally grow, you need to cook with equitable resources, hire equitably, all this sort of stuff. And I feel that PBS and public media and public impact media sort of has that same role. However, the problem is that after 60, 70 years of having this mission and this vision, um, and with the proliferation of content as we have seen it today, the the question of what is being produced and how is being produced becomes extremely important, right? Because you can create educational content in a myriad of different ways, right? You can, and I have seen some of the content that is produced in Brazil, and the honest truth is that it tends to be, for lack of a better word, a little more conservative in its approach. It tends to be a little more boring and not as daring as other as people would want. So I think producers that are generating content for public television need to be very aware that they also need to innovate in formats. They need to innovate in storytelling. They need to innovate in how these stories are being told, so that they are at the forefront of how things are being told, right? This was the role of public television many years ago. It was not only unearthing things that needed to be told, but it was also finding new ways of telling, of telling stories. You have things like Sesame Street, you have a variety of things. And I know that in Brazil, there are cases like that, right? But for some reason, that creativity has receded to the background, and the practicality of the educational content has taken over, and innovation exists outside of that space. And I that's what I was trying to do for 15 years, right, in Los Angeles. It was, okay, how do we use this space where we need impact, where we need a mission, right? And when we are tackling issues that are not easy, how do you creatively approach those so that they can reach a younger audience, a more diverse audience, and we can promise that we will be able to be on par with what is being generated, by studios and streamers and all this sort of stuff. So I think that there are a lot of different questions around it, but I think of course it's a question of distribution, but it's also a question of creativity, and it's producers tend to, and creatives in public media tend to always focus on, like, well, we just don't have the impact because of the distribution is not the same, and blah blah blah. But I think that there needs to be more daring, um, um, creative sort of vision, to take public content media, public service media into another space in this sort of streaming wars and world that we're in.
That's great.
Juan,
That's great. Great advice. Great advice. Perfect
it's
for
great.
Brazilian audience.
Yeah, and we're great to for us to hear your thoughts about what you did. But we want to know, since you left the PBS Los Angeles, what you are envisioning and what are your plans for now. So share with us a little bit what we are building.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that I drove, um, during those 10, 15 years, I drove the generation of content through, unearthing sort of new creative voices, new stories, and new ways of storytelling, right? And um, the problem that I kept on bumping against was that I was also part of a network, right? And I was part of not only running and producing and generating and creating new content, but I was also part of, the distribution operation, the marketing operation, the fundraising operation. I mean, you can, right? It was ultimately a network, and I realized that I was spending so much time trying to um, um, add some creative energy into all these other aspects of the network, that the the thing that I love the most, which is to produce content, was sort of fallen behind. And I realized it was time to to step out of that role and explore things that I have been wanting to explore. Right? If we talk about the changes in demographics that are happening here in the United States, right? I look south, to Mexico, to Colombia, to Brazil, to Cuba, to Argentina, and I realized that there are amazing opportunities over there, and I truly think that the Americas, the United States, and South America and Central America have much more in common than what they have with Europe. Yet there has been a real connection between the United States and Europe in terms of media generation, and what the mainstream American audience consumes. My goal with this new venture, or one of the goals in this new venture, is to start to create those pipelines with Latin America, not in a way that will niche our content as Hispanic or Latino only, but a way in that we can be crossover agents, right? And pushing multicultural content here in the United States and over there, and sort of building the bridges between the U.S. and Latin America. That's one of the things that I want to do. But I also, to your question before, Samuel or Fabio, about um, the role of public television, I also realized that sometimes when you swim against the current, you get tired, right? And what I realized is that I had uh, my my ethics as a creative are very clear, right? And I think that you can generate content that has impact, content that has education, and content that has a social purpose that is accessible to a wider audience. Um, and I wanted to take that step in sort of expanding the the opportunities that that vision has, right? Because I realize I cannot change a system, right? But I can find ways of getting my content into different places, in different, different audiences and in different hands. So I had met this wonderful man, Jeff Berg, who used to be the chairman and ICM, chairman and president of and CEO of ICM, which was one of the biggest talent agencies in the world for a very long time, and later sold to CAA. We had produced a documentary about water. We worked extremely well, and when I was leaving, we sort of joined forces to create this new company called Ninetythree Media. And we're not even in a year of the creation of the company, and we're already having very solid conversations with Latin American partners. In Brazil specifically, we're having really interesting conversations about partnerships, co-productions, looking at incentives as a way to bring more production from the United States into Latin America and vice versa. um, and generating a content pipeline and setting up projects in a variety of different places, so that we're not locked into one particular sort of streamer or distribution space, but looking at the multiplicity of opportunities that we currently have in the market.
In terms of distribution, what are you aiming at this point? Are you partnering with the streaming platforms or cable channels, or maybe setting a fast channel for yourself, or what kind of distribution are you looking for?
I mean, at this point, Samuel, it's really a project by project base. There are some projects that would find a great home on Apple, others would find a great home on Netflix, others would find a great home on PBS, others would find a great home in, so we're not locking ourselves into one particular distribution partner, because we have a lot of different projects, right? We are developing factual and scripted programming, and even though it all has some sort of social impact attached to it, they're very different, and we're taking advantage of the diversity of opportunities that studios and streamers can give to Ninetythree.
How do you compare, Juan, Ninetythree Media, or the difference between Ninetythree and participant media? I know that you are in the impact board, something in participant media, but how is that? They do exactly something with purpose as well, no? But just for us to a little bit understand the differential of
They
the
do. I mean, I think I'm in the impact board of participant media, and participant is really focused on impact, right? Focus on impact, and they build a lot of impact campaigns around the content that they generate.
I think that's a good idea to explain to our audience what participant media is.
Yeah, I
I
mean, participant media was founded by Jeffrey Skoll in 2004, right? And um, this is a company that was purposely created to generate content that had impact 20 years ago, right? And there were a lot of things that they had. They had something called Pivot TV, which was a cable television show. They had something called Take Part, which was really very much a campaign based sort of strategy, using media as a way to sort of activate community around a particular issue. And then they had film. As they have developed, and now David Linde is running the company, they have focused a little more instead of just diversifying so much. And in a way, a lot of the efforts that they had on Take Part, on Pivot, are being very much focused into particular projects that they do, right? They normally focus on issues that are relevant. They're global, but issues that are relevant to the American audience for sure, um, with an eye to, sort of global distribution and all that stuff. I think, I mean, there's so many differences, Fabio, between 93 Media and Participant. The first one is that, you know, uh, Jeffrey Skoll is the founder of Participant, and I am not a multimillionaire, so it's a different thing. But I think that the one of the big important distinctions is the point of view that 93 Media has in vis-a-vis this understanding of the Americas and need to create this sort of loop and pipeline between Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, and the United States in a different way that maybe perhaps breaks a little bit the paradigm that currently we have, where you have niched Mexican content and niche Hispanic content. I think we're much more multicultural than that, right? And the capacity to find IP and editorial projects and projects that allow us to sort of cross over and tell and talk about the relationships that we all have and the commonalities that we all have. So I think editorially, I think that there are a lot of difference in mission and vision. Yes, we have a lot of similarities, but operationally also and financially, they're just two completely different things. I'm in conversations with Participant on a couple of ideas right now, and we'll see how those go, because we share a lot of things in common, right? And I'm not gonna get into it because we're still in conversations, but I'm sure that in the future there's going to be a relationship that comes out of that.
In your case, 93 Media, what kind of impact you're trying to promote with your shows? It's more environment biased, or more racial, or more gender? What is?
We actually focus on a lot of different issues, right? And they cross over from environment to gender, right? We have an environmental sort of global magazine show right now in development with Paramount. We have a food show that looks at the sort of the ecological ecosystem behind the products that are being used in a restaurant. Across the Americas, we have projects where we are dealing with sexual assault here in the United States. So I think we're choosing these projects, not necessarily based on just one particular issue, but on a variety of them. We have another one that looks at Cuba before the revolution and what was going on over there. That convergence of American interests with Latin American realities. And so I wouldn't say that we're an environmental only company that is looking at these type of issues. I think it's more the sentiment of what things do we consider right now important and to have an impact. I mean, if you see the news of Trump and his sexual abuse case and rape case that was going on a week or 2 weeks ago, and it's probably going to continue. These are issues that go back 300 years, right? And so I think it's more, what are the genres and how are we going to crossfade them? How do we keep on pushing multicultural content, and how we build bridges between the United States and Latin America?
Do you believe that bringing this kind of approach to your content wouldn't be a problem in today's world, where we have this very clear division in the society? People don't want to some people don't want to discuss about climate. They don't want to discuss about racial issues. They don't want to discuss about gender. On the other way, what we are seeing in US is in some cases a very radical approach from authorities in terms of contents that can be shown in school. Don't you think that this is a risky approach in the commercial side, but also for the audience?
That's another great question, Samuel. And probably I should have mentioned something before. One of the things that I learned in public television, because of the funding complications, right, is that you needed to be partial, right? That I couldn't take one's point of view or the other point of view, um, because we needed to be able to, to be impartial. You're a journalist, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right?
We are never impartial. We are never impartial. We just try to be fair.
Exactly. That's the way to put it. When you look at something like participant, right? Participant goes head on into a particular issue, right? One of the things that we're trying to do also with the content that we're creating is complicate that conversation a little bit, right? Is, for example, the environmental show that we have, right, are three young environmentalists that go across the world looking at environmental issues from different perspectives. One is a skeptic, one is a true believer, and the other one is a pragmatic. And they have to sit down to figure out what exactly is happening, right? Every single episode. And I think that creating also those pockets where there is dialogue around an issue or dialogue around issues is very important. And it's not content that is very normally generated, right? So we are also trying to inhabit that space with some of the content that we are developing so that we have impact, not necessarily in the way that we need to be pushing an agenda on the Senate, but have impact in the way that we're bridging opportunities for dialogue in complicated issues.
So, Juan, as a last question, since you are running out of time, so I would love you to share with our Brazilian audience who watch the Tela Viva channel, what kinds of partnership are you looking for with Ninetythree Media and Brazilian companies? How production houses or creators in Brazil could approach Ninetythree Media? What kind of content interests to you? So I think.
I mean, I think that there's a variety of different ways, and I've been having these conversations with some of your colleagues, Samuel and Fabio, already in Brazil. But I think that there's a couple of opportunities that we have. First, simple. The creative talent in Brazil is incredible, right? Both, behind the camera, in front of the camera, technically speaking, as well, right? So I think that there's an opportunity to really think about, setting up co-production opportunities with Brazil, with different studios, with different companies. I know that there's an incentive, a production incentive in Brazil. It may not be as big as it is in other countries, but it is there. So how do we, financially take advantage of that, and how do we work more closely with creatives that are articulating particular projects that are developed elsewhere? That's one. Then the second one is, how do you work with that creative and production sort of engine in Brazil, which is, it's pretty strong and, and diverse. How do we find the right, intellectual property? How do we find the right content that can articulate sort of the vision of Ninetythree Media, that is bridging these two particular worlds? I was talking to a colleague of yours yesterday. Music, of course, in Brazil is enormous, but the connectivity between, Brazilian musicians and American musicians can give us also entry points. I think that there are a lot of narratives that can be developed so that we have one foot in the United States, one foot in Brazil, take advantage of the sort of the creative vision and creative power over there. And yeah, I mean, so I think it's content, it's production, it's financial, and I'm really looking forward to doing that in the near future.
And here in Brazil, we also have some streaming platforms that are Brazilian that probably they are looking for contents as well. So you're open to discuss the distribution side as well, right?
Absolutely. Maybe there are formats, maybe there are spaces for distribution for the content. Yeah, I mean, I think that the future is wide open for the relationship between 93 Media and Brazil. And
is there any story behind the 93 for the 93 Media name?
Yeah, 93. My grandfather, back in the 1920s in Colombia, he was, he was a farmer, and he bought a lottery, and the last number of the lottery was 93. And with 93, he bought a little piece of land, and he brought a couple of cows, and he used 93. He had 93 everywhere, right? And he even used it as the brand of his cattle. And he grew to become a very important agricultural sort of farmer and rancher in Colombia, until the drug war made it so difficult, right? And I always look back at the time that I spent, working the land with him, and just seeing how this not very educated man was probably one of the smartest people I have ever met in my life. And so I wanted to honor that 93 and honor him and give it the name.
Great story, and it's a lucky name. So good luck with your company, your new venture.
Thank you so much.
So sure, no, Juan, thank you very much for being so generous to be with us today. I think it was great for the Brazilian audience to understand a little bit about your background and about the public and media sector in the US, and also to understand your new venture. And I hope that can open opportunities for Brazilian producers which used to watch Samuel's and Tela channel. So they will probably look into with projects, with ideas. So it's a great start point to present to the Brazilian stakeholders in the audiovisual industry. Thank you very much for that.
Muito obrigado. Muchas gracias. I look forward to another conversation. Great to meet you, Samuel, and great to see you again, Fábio.
My pleasure. Então, Fábio, a gente encerra aqui o nosso primeiro episódio, o nosso episódio piloto desse Café com Pixel. Aprendendo muita coisa aqui no decorrer do nosso programa, mas
em todos os sentidos, né, Samuel? Entendendo a tecnologia,
aprendendo coisas novas lá de fora, e foi uma grande conversa. Adorei, foi meu primeiro contato também com o Juan, adorei ter esse bate-papo com ele aqui, uma pessoa fantástica. A ideia é essa, gente, é conseguir trazer pessoas que sejam legais, que tenham histórias legais para contar, e que acrescentem, muitas vezes desconhecidas ainda no mercado brasileiro, em outras ocasiões certamente bem conhecidas, mas o papo ser um papo fluido e agradável. Espero que vocês tenham gostado também. Fábio, obrigado pela parceria mais uma vez. Ficamos por aqui. Até o próximo programa. Tchau, pessoal.
Um abraço, pessoal. Tchau.